New imperialism, as defined by British imperial policy scholar and American historian Roger Lewis, is a period of colonial expansion by European powers and the United States and Japan during the late 19th and 20th century. Colonial expansion being the process of establishing foreign control over territories and people. Now, the replacement of old imperialism and the rise of new imperialism didn't just emerge out of thin air, as argued by scholar Queen, with a direct quote from her 2007 book on colonialism being, "The so-called new imperialism of the 19th century does not just appear in a historical vacuum." We can therefore suggest that this shift was not a natural evolution, but instead had key roots and causes. It is argued by many scholars that it can only be new imperialism if it replaced something older. But what did it replace? New imperialism is said to have replaced older imperialism, but what is imperialism? This is the practice of a country extending its influence over another through military and diplomatic force. Old imperialism tended to focus on endeavours of establishing colonies and maintaining control of them, whereas new imperialism was a bid to find cheap resources, crops and labour to cover shortages in production. The Queen goes on to argue that new imperialism grew from a long narrative of European imperial expansion in the post-medieval world. This was not a quick process. It occurred over many centuries and developments of economic, military, political and religious reasons, as well as social Darwinism and technological advances. Economic reason played a large role in the shift to new imperialism. European industries needed to extend their markets globally in order to sell products they could not sell domestically. Religion played a further role in this, as it was believed that white Western Europeans received a lesson from God and were encouraged to send forth his teachings and so multiply their said breed as a moral obligation. Moreover, social Darwinism fostered imperialistic expansion by proposing some people were more fit than others, particularly referencing white Europeans believing that the white race was superior and the naturally fit to conquer the inferior. A final, but not the last reason, can be pinned to Western technology and medicine. Superior Western advancements meant Europeans were more equipped to survive tropical diseases and viruses found in Africa and Asia. As well as this, technological advances such as the steamboat allowed Western powers to increase mobilisation, thus fueling the advancement from old to new imperialism.
So now me and Ailbhe are going to explain how Hobson and Lenin's work helps scholars account for new imperialism by reading the work. I'll be studying Lenin's work on new imperialism, and Ailbhe will be looking at Hobson's section.
Hobson and Lenin were two very important theorists who held a dominant place in explaining the economic motives of imperialism. Both men analysed the economic factors of the capitalist system, which they believe accounted for the new imperialism. They came up with theories that both stressed the Western need to export capital as the primary engine behind the growth of the empires, and some of their findings held similar ideas. Due to this, some scholars believe that their ideas were so similar that they formed a shared Hobson-Lenin theory. However, most scholars identified the difference between both theories, and due to their research, it helped scholars account for the new imperialism. Hobson, born in 1858 and died in 1940, was an English economist and social scientist who was best known for his writing Imperialism, a Study. This writing on the account for imperialism influenced many scholars, including Vladimir Lenin. Hobson's theory is useful in explaining the role of overaccumulation in overseas economic and colonial expansion. He focuses on imperialism as a result due to the overproduction of goods caused by the rapid industrialization, the shrinking of continental markets, which drove European capital overseas, and the unequal distribution of wealth resulting in low wages and underconsumption at home. Hobson argued that it was unavoidable that the result of low wages would lead to the overproduction at home. So to find desirable markets for their goods, industries sought out new markets and new investment opportunities in the colonies. However, Hobson argues that imperialism could have been solved through increasing wages. Hobson was the first to publish his work and his views on imperialism. It is clear that his work shaped thinking of some scholars, including those of Lenin, who published work 14 years later.
Lenin's argument revolved around the hypothesis and the idea that capitalism was driven towards colonialism and revolved around finance capital. His work revolved around Hobson's argument that imperialism was a result of capitalist overproduction. However, he goes further to stipulate that imperialism was the culmination of aggressive capitalism, and it was the prelude to a socialist revolution. Lenin's argument goes off on the theory of finance capital, and this, in Marxist terminology, it relates to Lenin's geopolitics. Marx was not satisfied with defining capital simply as money or money used in the production process, and for Marx, capital was a process that defines the social relations of production. Thus, this stipulates that it can manifest itself as money, but can equally manifest itself as the commodities, the means of production involved in the productive process. Finance capital was capital that has accumulated beyond the production process, that circulates within the banking investment structures and is in constant motion. Lenin showed that the concentration of capital led to a stage of capitalism known as monopoly capitalism. In this stage, the export of goods was exported by the export of capital. Instead of investing in the living standards of the working class and domestic territory, it moves into foreign territories where profits are typically high, which is standardly known as imperialism. When capitalism outgrows its domestic territory, colonialism offered a protective outlet for the capital and opportunistic countries took advantage of this. It offered investment opportunities such as infrastructural developments like railways and ports for less developed colonies, and provided an outlet for European products which were not profitable on the home market. These colonies were also a source of raw materials which could feed metropolitan industries and keep the production costs low. This was typically in places like India, Africa, and Eastern countries. Lenin argued that capitalism could not be rescued by colonialism and could only really be a temporary reprieve.
To conclude, we can see that the shift from old imperialism to new imperialism was primarily caused by capitalist factors, as accounted for by scholars such as Hobson and Lenin. These scholars forming the Hobson and Lenin theory provided a consensus among many historians around the roots of new imperialism, which was an idea that was to be developed by further scholars in years to come. Puts forth a more developed version of Hobson's theory, stipulating that imperialism was the culmination of aggressive capitalism and was the prelude to a socialist revolution. However, we see slight differences in approach and theory. We can also see that whether it be from industrialisation to overproduction, both scholars follow a consensus and put forward the idea that if it were not for capitalist factors, new imperialism would not have come about.